I want to talk a little bit about these isolation changes. Why August the 16th?
So what we've done is we've got these two dates. So July the 19th, as everybody knows, was a delay from June the 21st. And August the 16th gives a little bit more protection in terms of dealing with coronavirus. We've always said that the 19th of July is not the end. It's the end of the roadmap, but it's not the end of dealing with coronavirus. And looking at the numbers, we felt that having an extended period till August the 16th for self-isolation, and we'll lift the self-isolation rules on August 16th, gives an extra measure of protection.
But millions of people, those being asked to self-isolate now, are fit and well and healthy. We've got the tests in place that can see whether they've got coronavirus or not. That already exists. Why are we waiting?
I think that there's obviously a balance to be struck, because some people are saying that we're lifting restrictions too quickly. Other people are saying that we've had them for too long. And of course, the government has to strike a balance. And I think that the balance that we've struck in terms of August the 16th for self-isolation rules makes sense.
And so in that gap between the 19th and the 16th, what is going to happen to mean that by the 16th, people who are double jabbed can come out of that quarantine once they've had a test?
So one of the things that will happen, I mean, obviously it's 4 weeks, is that there'll be far more people who've been double jabbed. And the people who will be double jabbed in that period are younger people, people who are professionals in their working life, and I think it gives a lot more security. That's the idea.
But in the meantime, you will know, and I'm sure as a business minister, you will be hearing from people making representations to you about this. These businesses, some places are having to shut down. There are bars, there are restaurants having to close. They don't have the staff. There are hospitals that are running out of people to be able to come and man it at such a critical time. This is costing the economy now.
So what really cost the economy a great deal was actually having the lockdown in the first place. And all the people that I've spoken to from the hospitality sector, the retail sector, were very disappointed, rightly, that we couldn't open up on the 21st of June. And once we missed that date, I think there was a real pressure, rightly, to try and see what we could do to reopen the economy. We looked at the numbers, we looked at the science, and we felt that the 19th of July is a plausible date. We haven't actually made the decision about the 19th of July. I hasten to add, we're going to do that on Monday, this coming Monday. But the hospitality sector is very, very enthused by the fact that we're actually going to reopen on the 19th of July. They're enthused by that prospect.
Do you think it's fair to say to those people who haven't been jabbed that they will have to face restrictions that those who have been double jabbed won't?
I think it's not a matter of fairness. It's a matter of trying to keep people safe. And clearly, if you've been double jabbed, you represent less of a risk in terms of transmitting the illness, the virus, than someone who hasn't had any jabs.
And so the people who haven't had any jabs will now forever or for the foreseeable, for how long will they have to quarantine if they come into contact with someone who has tested positive?
Well, what I would suggest to people who haven't had jabs is to get a jab. Millions of fellow countrymen and women have done that. I think it's given.
But if they
people
don't, they face they face a life of greater restriction, don't they?
Well, if they don't, in the short term, I can't predict, forever and ever and ever. But in the short term, obviously, we're facing a global pandemic. Hundreds of thousands have died, millions have died across the world, and we have to bring in measures. And clearly, if you you've got a double jab, if you've been vaccinated twice, you represent less of a risk than someone who hasn't had a jab.
Why? If we're going to open up the country in July, why are people like me going to have to wait until August to avoid self-isolating if I come into contact like this, at this distance from someone who's COVID-19 positive?
Yeah, I mean, again, there's always a balance. So people on the one hand are saying that the 19th of July is too soon for general reopening, and other people are saying that it's not soon enough. In the case of self-isolation, we feel that it does, delaying it for 4 weeks, does give a measure of protection. It allows more and more people to be jabbed, and we think that that's a precaution that's worth taking.
But we're opening up hospitality. People will be in pubs, bars, restaurants, potentially without wearing their masks. We understand, of course, that the hospitality sector, 16 to 34-year-olds make up 60% of the workforce, and none of them, well, very few of them, will be double vaccinated, even by the middle of August. Do you accept the fact that the hospitality industry is going to be hit incredibly hard if hundreds of thousands, even millions of people are going to be self-isolated as a result of us opening up, perhaps, in the view of some, just a little bit too early?
I think we're making all sorts of assumptions here.
Well, we've got to.
We've got to make some...
You're modelling, we're modelling.
Yeah, we've got to make... But you're always looking at the worst possible case. My own view about the hospitality sector is that they were very, very keen to reopen. If you speak to pub owners, if you speak to people in the hospitality business, they were very disappointed that we didn't open up on the 21st of June. And I think many of them, the majority, would say that this is the right precaution to be taking. They're very happy.
I think they were all very happy because they assumed that come July the 19th, people who were double vaccinated would be able to avoid self-isolating. I mean, obviously, you're the business secretary, you know a fair amount about business, but, Julian Metcalf, the founder of Itsu, the founder of Pret a Manger, I mean, he's described this strategy, and I quote, as completely and utterly mental.
Well, you can't have it both ways. On the one hand, we're saying that we want to reopen, but we're giving a measure of precaution in terms of delaying lifting the self-isolation restrictions. It's a balance. It's not a perfect solution, but on the one hand, we're saying that we can reopen, and on the other hand, we're saying that we want to give a little bit more protection in terms of the self-isolation rules.
Sure, but it's not even just people in business that are saying this, and the head of the Hospitality UK has made similar comments to Mr Metcalf. I mean, Ian Duncan-Smith makes the point, look, why go into a pub where people are not still adhering to the rule of six, where there's no social distancing? Because in all likelihood, if you go to the pub more than a couple of times a week, you will get pinged at some point, and you will have to isolate.
So the big thing here is that we need to rely on people's judgment. There's common sense and a degree of individual responsibility. That's always going to be, ultimately, what we have to rely on. And in this instance, we've said we're going to reopen. People will be allowed not to wear masks, to do what they choose. But also, the businesses themselves will be conducting business in a responsible way. I think this is perfectly reasonable.
Just in terms, though, of who might well be affected, I mean, we understand, of course, the younger you are, the less likely it is that you've had a vaccine, certainly be double vaccinated. Isn't it the case? I mean, you don't accept the figure of several million people isolating. Others have suggested it's fairly standard. But that means the infection will be running through young people, won't it? Once again, the youngest in our society, those that have lost, frankly, from certain perspectives, the most in all of this, will once again have to suffer. Tell me that this isn't, herd immunity by another name.
So, again, as I always say, there's a balance. When this awful illness struck, it was very apparent that certain groups were much more vulnerable than others. In the case of COVID, it was older people. That's why the vaccination rollout happened the way it did. We targeted older, more vulnerable people. And the medical view was that younger people had more protection than more vulnerable groups. Clearly, we're looking at vaccinating younger people. We're looking at what JCVI are going to say. But we feel that, on balance, the best approach is to try and get our kids back into school and get them back into normal life.
Can we just have someone from the government concede there will be millions of people who will be isolating this summer as a result of the unlocking?
I don't think you can necessarily conclude that there'll be millions. We've always said...
significant.
We've always said that...
Significant number.
The numbers would be going up. But of course, the critical thing, Neil, is what the hospitalisation rates and the fatalities as well. And the numbers we've seen on that have been much, much lower than anyone anticipated. And that's because of the success of the vaccination programme. And I think that's what's giving people protection. We've always said, we've always believed that infection rates might go up. But the critical point is what the effect of those infection rates is. And I think the vaccination double doses particularly give a measure of protection that we're happy with.
But in addition, long COVID is clearly a thing. And if we're talking about 100,000 new cases a day, I mean, estimates vary, but a ballpark figure of 5,000 people a day acquiring long COVID or at some point in the future acquiring long COVID symptoms. I mean, that's not beyond the imagination, is it?
It's not beyond the imagination, but I think we've got to get, I think you're getting ahead of where we are, because what I speak to, what I hear is that we can't simply lock down the society forever. We have to reopen. If we don't reopen fully on the 19th of July, the implications of that would be simply just to delay all of this till perhaps September and in the winter, where things would become more difficult. So it's a balancing act. We have to decide what to do, and I think this is the best course of action.
There is a real risk, isn't there, that we're just playing a waiting game until another domestically produced, perhaps even more resistant to vaccine variant emerges? So
again, as I always say, there's a balance, but the critical difference between this time and late last year has, of course, been the vaccine rollout. We've had 75 million doses. We've had 2/3 of the population certainly getting the first dose. And that's a completely different scenario than was the case last year.
Where do you personally sit on the idea of vaccinating, 12 years and above?
Well, I don't know what the medical opinion is. I would definitely defer to the JCVI on that, and they're going to make their ruling or their judgment public very soon.
The mandatory wearing of masks. Where do you sit on that? I mean, in what circumstances will you be wearing a mask?
So I've always said that I believe in individual responsibility. I think businesses have their own discretion, their own judgment. I think individuals should also use their own judgment. Personally, I use the tube a lot in London, and I would probably wear a mask in that context, in the tube, in public transport. That's a personal view. It's not something that I would mandate or necessarily dictate to other people.
But you'd be quite happy for businesses, say airlines, hospitality sector, to continue to require people wearing a mask inside their premises?
Yes, I mean, actually before COVID, it was very interesting that businesses have always had the ability to prescribe certain health or they've always had that. And I think we're going back to that situation. People have forgotten that actually businesses did have some discretion in terms of what people could wear.
But the thing that people have always struggled with this is that the wearing of masks, there's a degree to which it's a prophylactic measure that you're looking after yourself, but it is in essence about looking after others.
True.
I mean, if you are someone who, say, has leukemia, you're immunosuppressed, you're sitting on public transport, do you think that they have a right to demand that other people wear masks when they're on public transport?
So if we wind the clock back to pre-COVID, we had people who were immunosuppressed, we had flu. And what would happen in those days was that they would take the advice from their doctors, they'd take medical advice. And I think I'd expect that to continue post-COVID.
I see that there's a report that some of your colleagues in the Cabinet are worried about Wembley and the fans being acting as a sort of super spreader event. Are you worried by that?
Yeah, there's always concern. Clearly, as I always say, the word I always use is balance. There are always going to be risks. So if you're in government, you have to balance and you have to weigh using your judgment. I think the competition has gone really well, not just for England. I think it's been well run. People have enjoyed the football. And I think we can manage this risk. But to say that there is no risk if you have thousands of people in one place,
so it could be despite the testing and everything else. There's
always risk in life. There's always risk in life. I think we're managing the risk. I'm confident that there won't be a big outbreak, but I can't guarantee that now. And we've got to just see what happens. I think it'll be well managed, as it has been in the last few weeks. I think it's a great competition. I think England have got a really good chance of winning. But we've got to manage that process, and we've got to recognise that where there are lots of people, we've got to be more careful.
The cost of climate change, obviously the news about the Vauxhall plant and Nissan earlier on in the week, there's a lot of money being spent on this, rightly, understandably. Are people going to see their gas bills, are people going to see their petrol prices and their costs to run a car increase in order to meet that target of net zero by 2050?
I don't think that's necessarily the case. If you look at something like offshore wind, and you'll remember, even as late as 2012, 40% of our electricity came from essentially burning coal. Now, today, that figure is less than 2%. So we've had a massive transition in terms of how our electricity is generated. But if you look at the actual cost, it's pretty much the same. So because the wholesale cost has actually gone down. So we can't predict what.
So people aren't going to see, as was reported in the papers the other week, a rise of, say, a third in their gas bills. That's not going to happen. I don't think necessarily that's going to happen. What about gas boilers? That's one area where a lot of emissions come from. Is there a pledge still to ban gas boilers from new homes by 2023?
I think there is a pledge to move away from gas boilers, but there's no sense that we're going to force people to rip out gas boilers and replace them imminently. It'll be a phase out, much like the ICE in terms of the cars. I imagine
that's got a date
that's the sort
to
of thing.
it. Do we have a date to the boilers?
No, we haven't we haven't got a date because we're consulting about it and we're formulating policy. But I think that there may well be a move away from gas boilers, but that's not something that's going to happen next week.
No, and will the retrofitting that will need to take place, whether it's heat pumps or whatever, will that have to come out of households' expense, or will the government be able to subsidise that? Because that could cost people tens of thousands of pounds.
You're right, Tom. It is costly, but the government has always protected vulnerable people, has always provided support. Already today, we provide things like the Warm Home Discount. We had the Green Homes Grant, which was up to £10,000 free for vulnerable families. There's always going to be a measure of support. This isn't going to be something which will cost people, vulnerable people,
but I see
anything.
So it won't cost them anything.
It won't cost them much. The poorest in society will always be protected and helped to make this transition.
I see in your 10-point plan for a green industrial revolution,
Yes.
you say that you want to see a gradual move away from fossil fuel boilers over the next 15 years. So is that the kind of timescale people will be working towards?
Yeah, I think that's, look, so yes, I think you're right. So 15 years, so it's 2021 now, and 15 years' time is 2036. So we're talking about a date in the 2030s as opposed to anything next week or in a year's time.
But people should be prepared for that change to happen over the course of the next 15 years, and the poorest will receive a grant to be able to do that?
I'm sure that this is where we're going. This is where we've said, as you say, in the 10-point plan. And as we've always done, we've always committed support to people to help that transition. That's very clear.
I don't know whether you've seen, I'm sure you have seen the fact that petrol prices are rising. They continue to keep going up. A lot of people will feel, because they can't afford an electric vehicle right now, that they are being almost priced off the road here. And we all want to be as green as we possibly can. But do you feel that there is how much is there the right balance being struck between helping people to go green and forcing them to?
It's always a difficult trade-off, Tom, because we want to encourage certain types of behaviour, but at the same time, we realise that there can be a cost involved, and where there are costs, we've tried as a government to soften that impact. If you look at the fuel duty, we've suspended the escalator on fuel duty for the last 10 years. We've protected consumers in that way, and as we do the transition to a greener economy, I think the government will intervene and help our country make that transition.
You're making a fairly significant announcement, I have to say, today, in terms of life sciences. Tell us about it.
Absolutely right. Life sciences have been really at the forefront of our fight against COVID, and people know around the world that the UK is really a world leader in the life sciences. And today, we're launching the Life Sciences Vision, which is essentially a strategic look at how we can maximise great potential and our ability in this really crucial area. It's all about being able to get proper medicine, have high-level research, and critically commercialising that research, making great businesses out of really strong fundamental science.